In this video, we're going to be going over my top 25 most wanted Star Wars action figures for the Vintage Collection, and this is a part of the March Madness campaign hosted by the Star Wars TVC Instagram group. This is an event they've been doing for a couple years now at this point. I think this might be the 4th or 5th year they have been running this. And I have submitted a list every year since its inception. I think it's a great way for collectors to get their voices heard. And it seems like this campaign has been gaining a lot of momentum year after year. And many of the action figures that ultimately end up making the top 25 once everyone's brackets are all combined end up getting made by Hasbro, or at least get put on their radar. A good example of this is Count Dooku. I believe he was either the winner of 2022 or 23, I forget specifically. But of course now we have a Count Dooku. So if you're one of those people that thinks, oh, you know, this is an action figure that Hasbro will never get around to making, or most people have never heard of, this is a good way to bring that potential character that you really want in your collection to the discussion table. And yeah, we'll just go through my top 25. We'll go through each one individually. I guarantee some of these characters on my list here, most people have never heard of, if ever. So I'll talk briefly about each character and specifically why I picked them. I will note, before we jump into this, there is a general theme with the 25 I picked. Usually, most of these characters complete like a duo or a trio, etc., or a group of some sorts. Hasbro does have a bad habit of, you'll take a group of, let's say the Bad Batch for instance, and they'll make Hunter, but they won't make the rest of the Bad Batch, or at least they won't make the rest of them for the foreseeable future. So you'll notice a lot of the action figures on my list here are kind of complete sets that we've had before made by Hasbro. Without saying anything further, let's just go ahead and jump into character number 25 here. So character number 25 is Ragawada, and the reason why I picked this character is I believe it's a she, is one of the founding members of the Separatist Council. And the reason why I specifically picked this character is because I believe she has the most unique tooling out of the remaining Separatist Council members that we have left that Hasbro has not made. I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 of the Separatist Council members left for Hasbro to make, and this is definitely the one with the most unique tooling. And quite frankly, from the image you see here, I'm not sure if it can be reutilized for any other character tooling out there. And of course it would need all new tooling from the ground up. I can't really say much about this character. In fact, if you look on Ragwa's Wikipedia or Wikipedia page, there's pretty much only a paragraph about this character, and the scene you see here in the still, that's pretty much the only scene we see them of in Attack of Clones, and that's during the briefing where Obi-Wan is eavesdropping in on the Separatist Council, talking about their plans for the future. But I think this would be a great way to get some more aliens in the line. It's an interesting looking character, and I'm a big advocate for getting the Separatist Council completed, and this is a great step forward to making that happen. So character number 24 is Abeloth, which is probably one of the most powerful Force entities in the expanding universe. I just think she'd be an interesting character for Hasbro to explore, interesting character to get in action figure form, and it's very hard to describe this character. Like I said, she's a Force entity, and the image you see here, that's basically the only humanoid image that we have of her, as far as I know. I do know she's from the Fate of the Jedi book series, which I have not got around to reading. But I have read about Abeloth every now and then, and like I said, from my understanding, she's probably the most powerful Force entity to ever exist in the EU. And I just think she'd be an interesting character to have. And looking at the image here, I think a lot of people would agree she would be potentially an interesting action figure for Hasbro to make. So because of that, she's 24 on my list. 23 is the No-Gray Warrior, or No-Gray Assassin. I picked this character because I'm a big fan of the No-Gray anyway, and because Heir of the Empire is getting a lot of attention as of late, especially from Hasbro with the upcoming Thrawn, Joruus, and then Captain Pellaeon. I think this would be a great way to capitalize on that momentum and finally get a No-Gray Assassin in the 3 3/4 inch line. Interesting thing is we were supposed to get one in a comic pack with Lobaka back around 2009 and 10, but unfortunately plans fell through for that. There is a still image of that set, or a potential set, hovering around the internet somewhere. It's very hard to find, but I would have to go back and check to see how to find one. I basically you have to check on some of the forums if you really want to find one. If you just type in No Gray Assassin Warrior action figure online, I don't think it pops up quite that easy. But all these years later, great opportunity for Hasbro to finally get one in the 3 3/4 inch line. So 22 is the Clone Commando, probably one of the most requested clones at this point, and the fact we have an updated ARC Trooper and it's had a lot of releases over the last few years, it's about time we finally get the Clone Commando and an updated one at that. And I think it would need all new tooling from the ground up. At least I would prefer Hasbro to do that. But who knows at this point, they might borrow some tooling from Hunter. I would hope they would not do that because there are some differences between the Bad Batch armor and the Republic Commandos if you look at them closely side by side. But who knows with Hasbro these days. But still, I would like to get a Clone Commando. I know a lot of people would. A lot of potential reuse if they make a Clone Commando mold. Of course, they can make a new Delta Squad, and they could just make some generic Clone Commandos, do some repaints. They can make Omega Squad, updated versions of those, and I know a lot of people would like that. So figure number 21 is Maxron Agolurga. This is the priest, basically, who officiates the wedding between Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. This kind of goes back to completing a set. We do have Padme in her wedding gown, and we kind of have an Anakin associated with that scene. And it'd be nice to get the religious figure or the priest who oversees the wedding between the two. From my understanding, there's not a whole lot of information about him as well, but he is the head of some religious order on Naboo. I would have to go back and check the history of him, but I just think this would be another deep cut action figure to add to the line. And I do see his name tossed around every now and then, or at least the image of him, of people suggesting that he should get an action figure. And I think he should as well. I mean, he is kind of an important part of the Star Wars universe. He officiates the wedding between Anakin and Padme, which is, quite frankly, a big deal. So I would like to get an action figure of him, and I'm sure a lot of parts from him could be reutilized for other action figures down the road. Number 20 is Cliegg Lars. We have a prequel Owen Lars and a prequel Beru Lars, but we don't have Cliegg Lars at this point, and I do see his name tossed around every now and then for potential action figures to be made of. Another deep cut action figure that does have his advocates every now and then. And I would like to have an action figure of him as well. These days Hasbro would make him a deluxe because of course he's missing his leg and we would need his hover chair to go along with him and a stand to accompany that. So because of that accessory, perhaps Hasbro would make him a deluxe. But who knows, regardless, I still would like an action figure of him. And this is a great way to bring them into the discussion. So number 19 here is kind of a generic alien, the Cellcast, which is from Knights of the Old Republic on Manon. I've always been a big advocate for getting generic aliens in the line, and with the troop builder packs we've been getting, I have suggested before that perhaps Hasbro could branch out a little bit and do some generic aliens. And I think a Cellcast would be a potential great contender for that. Especially since Hasbro has never attempted a Cellcast before, and this would be a great way to get some more aliens in the line. They could potentially reutilize this tooling for other action figures. They do have a little bit of a humanoid appearance, so perhaps some parts could be carried forward into other figures in the future, and then maybe they can make some name Cellcast to go along with it. There's a lot of potential for this. But yeah, that's number 19 for me. Number 18 is another generic alien, the Ricot. I've always been a big fan of the Ricot as part of the Infinite Empire, or the remains of it we see in the first Knights of the Old Republic game on the Unknown World. Again, another alien that Hasbro has never attempted up to this point, and there's a lot of potential for reuse of the tooling down the road. And they could also make a troop builder pack of a Ricot. There's various different designs of them. And they could make some of the name characters, like the One, for instance. I just see a lot of potential with this character, and as I said, I'm a big fan of the Ricot species, and it's interesting reading about them and going through the history of them. I think the Infinite Empire is very interesting, so this is another great way to get some more aliens in the line, and that's number 18 for me. Number 17 is Jagged Fell, who's the son of Baron Fell, and Jag does eventually go on to marry Jaina Solo. So he's kind of a pivotal part of the Skywalker line. And we do have 2 action figures of his father, Baron Fel, at this time. So I think it would make sense to get his son to accompany him. And I've always been kind of a fan of Jerick Fel. I have read about his character every now and then in some of the EU books. He was in Legacy of the Force, which in my opinion is one of my, it's one of my personal favorite Star Wars book series out there. I know it is kind of controversial with some people, but I enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed reading about Jack's character, and I would like to read more about him in the future. I believe he does deserve his own action figure, and of course we do have a Jaina, a Jason, and we do have a lot of characters associated with that time frame. I do have a custom Nadisi Deaa, which I have featured on the channel, who's kind of associated with him as well. And of course now I do have both Barons, which the second one, the TIE Fighter outfit one, I will get around to reviewing at some point. But Jag would just be another character that would help fill in that void and complete the set of a lot of the characters from that time frame. So he's number 17 for me. 16 is kind of building off Jerick Fel a little bit, and of course Anakin Solo, the younger brother of Jason and Jaina Solo. We have Jason, we have Jaina in the 3 3/4 inch line, so it only makes sense to have their younger brother from the New Jedi Order book series. Fortunately, his time was cut short, and he didn't make it past the Yuuzhan Vong War. Of course, he is named after his grandfather, Anakin Skywalker. Jason, Jaina, and Anakin, I think, is a necessity, so that's why Anakin Solo is on my list. Number 15 is Kasen Paratus from the Force Unleashed. Same species as Rats Terrell. I think at this point, the Rats Terrell action figure is maybe 13 or 14 years old at this point. So his tooling could probably be updated. So that would mean at this point getting an all new action figure from the ground up. And I think Kasen Paratus has enough intricate parts about him to justify getting an all new action figure. So the reason why I picked him is this is a great opportunity to get some more unique Jedi in the line. And plus, at this time, we do have Ram Koda, we do have the Force Unleashed Shaak Ti, and then, of course, Kasen Paratus. Those 3 are some of the initial Jedi that Starkiller hunts down. But we're missing Kasen Paratus at this point, so it'll be a great way to complete that initial set of Jedi that he ends up facing off with. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to see some more unique Jedi in the line, and this is a great contender for that. Number 14 is Jerick, the main villain from Dark Forces 2. We've gotten some Kyle Katarns over the years and some other Dark Forces affiliated characters in the action figure line, and I think Jerick will be a great contender for that. I think he's one of the more interesting villains post Return of the Jedi, and I always wanted to see an action figure of him. I think Hasbro could do it. And of course, if we can get some more Dark Forces characters, and of course with the ones we have, they could always use some more villains to interact with. Kyle Katarn could always use more villains to face off with. So yeah, Jerick's number 14 on my list. Number 13 is Queen Jamala. We always hear a lot about getting more Queen Amidala's in the line, and I am absolutely an advocate of that. But we don't hear Queen Jamala get talked about very much, and I think she deserves her place in the TBC line, or at least a 3 3/4 inch line in general. Just from what little we see of her, she's a great way to add to the world building aspect. We do have a lot of the action figures she's associated with in Attack of Clones, like the peasant disguised Anakin, of course Padme to go along with that, and then there's other characters like the Naboo Royal Guard, and we also have Sile Bibble, who's also in that scene, and we do have an action figure of him. So I think Queen Jamala would be a great way to help fill that void and fill out that scene a little bit more. And I think she'd be a good looking action figure, and with the modern technology we have for action figures, I think Hasbro could really do her justice. So number 12 for me is kind of alluding to a character that I'll be talking about a little further along in the list. Number 12 here is Yyr Fen, the right-hand man of Tiber Zahn, and he is the number 2 of the Zahn Consortium from the Empire at War Forces of Corruption game. I've always been a big fan of that game, and I'm a big fan of a lot of characters that it introduced to the Star Wars universe, and Yyr Fen is definitely one of those. I think he's an interesting character to read about. He seems to be very wise, very insightful. He does bring a lot of lore into the Star Wars universe, and I would just really like to see an action figure of him. Number 11 is the Phase 2 Dark Trooper. So of course we do have the Phase 1 Dark Trooper from the Legacy Collection. We have the Phase 3 Dark Trooper from the Power of the Force days, and in the Legacy Collection as part of the Droid Factory sets. But Hasbro never got around to the Phase 2 Dark Trooper. From my understanding, Hasbro was going to make one, but unfortunately it was canceled. I believe it was supposed to be part of the Droid Factory sets as well, where you would get various parts and then ultimately complete the Dark Trooper, similar to like the black and the more in-scaled Phase 3 Dark Trooper we got at the same time. And all these years later, I think it's about time for Hasbro to finally complete that Phase 2 Dark Trooper, and I know that a lot of people would like to have one. I would certainly get multiples of it. Hasbro could definitely make an army builder of this, and yeah, it's an action figure I've always wanted to add to my collection, and because of that, he's number 11 for me. Character number 10 for me is Sate Stage, the Imperial dignitary that we see alongside like Sim Alu and Krem Ballista Vinay, for example. I know a lot of people would say that, oh, we'll just get the Sim Alu and then we can carry that tooling over into the other Imperial dignitaries. Well, not exactly. Looking at all of them side by side, they are all different heights and they all have different designs to their outfits, where I think if Hasbro basically realized the body of Sim Alu for the rest of them, they would be highly inaccurate, and I think Sate Stage here definitely deserves his own new action figure from the ground up. I've always been a big fan of this character. Of all the Imperial dignitaries, this is the one I've always been most interested in and reading about. He does become Emperor of the Imperial Remnant post Return of the Jedi, just after the destruction of Death Star 2 and of course the alleged death of Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader. So because of that, he was basically the number 3 of the Galactic Empire, and then now he's moved up to Emperor status. And of course, that gets into a lot of EU lore, and then eventually here comes Kasan Aard, and of course Grand Admiral Thrawn and characters like that. But I just think he's a very interesting character, very important to the EU, and he deserves his own new action figure from the ground up. Of course, alongside the rest of the Imperial dignitaries, I really want to see Sim Alu and the rest of them that Hasbro has not made up to this point. The Sate Stage would be a great way to start with that. Number 9 for me is Lin May, the Jabba's Palace dancer that we see in the special edition of Return of the Jedi. So I'm a big fan of the Jabba's dancers, and most of them would fit along in the diorama display I have with the Boba Fett's or Jabba the Hutt's throne room. And I do have just about all the dancers at this point, except for Lin May and the other 2 that accompany her in that Power of the Force set. I do want to get that set at some point, but it's really not very good at all. I might just end up having to get it because it's probably a small chance Hasbro will ever revisit those 3 characters, but you never know. And between the 3, there's the female Rodian, and then there's the character with the red hair as well, and of course Lin May. Between the 3, she's the one I would want most, and perhaps her tooling could be realized for other characters. She is different enough from Oola where I think she would need an all-new action figure, but who knows, maybe Hasbro could reutilize some parts from her to make an Oola action figure. And the reason why I did not include Oola here and Lin May instead is there are a lot of advocates for Oola, so I'm sure she's on Hasbro's radar. In fact, I know she probably is on Hasbro's radar, especially after the Rancor campaign in the Black Series. But this is a good way to get this character back into the discussion, and I'm always interested in more background aliens, and I think Lin May would be a great contender to help fill in that world building aspect. Number 8 for me is Jan Ors, specifically from Dark Forces 2. We've gotten Kyle Katarns before, so I think it'd be appropriate to finally get Jan Ors in the line. She's always rated very high on my list. I've always been a fan of Jan Ors. It's possible her tooling could be realized from the Jyn Erso action figure, especially the body, but I think at this point it'd be nice to get an all-new action figure from the ground up. And of course, her tooling could be reutilized for other action figures down the road. Perhaps we could get a new Jyn Erso, and I'm sure there's other ones out there that Hasbro could think of to make to carry that tooling forward. But yeah, it'd just be nice to finally get Jan Ors in the line. She's been a character in the expanded universe for 30 years now at this point. It's about time she gets her own action figure. Then leading into number 7 here, Kyle Katarn. if we're going to get a new Yyr, I think it's appropriate to get a new Kyle Katarn to go alongside her. Perhaps Hasbro could do a 2-pack similar to like the Vader and Obi-Wan from the Obi-Wan show. We do have 2 Kyle Katarn action figures from the Power of the Force days and the Legacy collection from the comic packs. But I know a lot of people, myself included, would like to see an updated version of Kyle Katarn. And if Hasbro would bother to make Yyr, we do need Kyle Katarn to go alongside her. Number 6 for me is Deaa, one of the Jedi Council members. Quite frankly, the one action figure we have of her from the Jedi Council set is not very good at all. She doesn't have a lightsaber, and she's basically a statue. You can't really do much with her at all. She can't even sit down at all. She's, like I said, she's just a solid piece basically from the neck down. Can't really do much with the action figure, and it's not very good at all. It's about time we get an updated version of her. And if Hasbro could only update one Jedi Council member, Deaa is probably the one I would pick. All the other action figures of the other council members are adequate enough. At least most of them do have some articulation to them, or they look good enough where they can fill the part. But Deaa, I think, definitely deserves an all-new action figure from the ground up. And perhaps if Hasbro did make an action figure of her, her tooling could be reutilized for further female Jedi down the road. Maybe they could do Baltar Swan. There's an infinite amount of potential to use with this tooling. I think Deaa would be the appropriate place to start. Number 5 is Slave Leia or Hut Slayer Leia, whichever you prefer. I know a lot of people at this point are probably tired of getting tired of having Leias in the line, but if Hasbro could only make one more, I think Slave Leia should be the one they do. Of course, who knows if Hasbro will ever revisit this version of Leia ever again, but if it's not out of the question and it is on the table, this is the one more Leia I would like to see Hasbro attempt to make at this point, if they could never make any more Leias ever again after this. And I know a lot of people would like to see an updated version of Slave Leia. I do read every now and then people advocating for her, and I think Hasbro could really do her justice at this point with the technology we have, the face printing, the articulation. Hasbro could really do a good job with Slave Leia, and that's why she's number 5 on my list. Number 4, kind of alluded to earlier, Tyberzon. To be honest, if I could make a top 10 most favorite Star Wars characters list, Tyberzon might potentially make that list for me. I've always been a huge fan of Tyberzon. I think he's one of the most interesting characters in all the Star Wars expanded universe, and the guy's just very successful at what he does. I don't see people talk about him so much anymore, but this is a great way to get him back into the discussion, and he rates very high on my list, and so Tyberzon is number 4 for me. Number 3 is Sararia, who is the aide and personal assistant to Chancellor Valorum. So at this time we have Chancellor Palpatine, his aide Sly Moore, and of course Mas Amedda, specific to Revenge of the Sith. We do have a Chancellor Valorum action figure, and we have a Mas Amedda specific to the Phantom Menace, and I believe Attack of the Clones as well. But we're missing his aide Sararia here, and I think it's about time we finally get her in the action figure line. From my understanding, there was a little bit of a campaign for her back in around the Legacy Collection days, but obviously it went nowhere with Hasbro, and I think it's about time we correct that and get her an action figure. I think her tooling could be reutilized for further action figures. Perhaps they can make some of the handmaidens for like Queen Amidala, for instance, with her tooling, or they could make some of the other aides for some of the other senators down the line. But yeah, I just would really like to see an action figure of Sararia. Number 2 on my list is Darth Malik. Of course, now we have the updated Darth Revan, so it's about time we finally get Malik in the line again. And when you have the updated Revan and the 30th anniversary Malik side by side, it's not very congruent, I'll say that. So it's about time we finally get an updated Malik. I imagine it's on Hasbro's radar at this point, and they're probably just going to be scaling down the Black Series action figure if they venture down that path. I know Malik has a lot of advocates out there, and I'm sure he's going to show up on a lot of people's lists. So it's about time we finally get Darth Malik on a TBC card. Number 1 on my list is probably not going to be a huge surprise to a lot of people, but director Kasen Aard. Now I know some people are probably going to be saying, oh, well, we can make a Kasen Aard out of the upcoming Deidre tooling. I would argue against that. The tooling that Deidre is going to be getting, I think she's reutilizing a lot of parts from the male Imperial officer body, especially from the waist down, and I don't think that's a good reuse at all. I think Hasbro needs to make an entirely new female Imperial officer's body from the ground up, and I think Yyr Fen is an appropriate place to start with that, and her tooling could be reutilized for other characters. Perhaps they could make a more appropriate Deidre, but they could also make Natasy Daala, Juno Eclipse, Tala or Lieutenant Tala, I believe it is, from the Obi-Wan show. There's a lot of potential for female Imperial officers, but so far what I have seen of the images from Hasbro, I have not been too happy with the Deidre. I do plan to get that action figure regardless, and of course I'll do a video in comparison, seeing how it holds up compared to the female Imperial officers we've gotten in the past. But regardless, I would like to see all new tooling from the ground up. Of course, since I'm a big fan of Yyr, she's one of my personal favorite characters from the expanding universe in general, and of course she's kind of the mascot on my channel here. So I think it's about time we finally get her on a TVC card. She's been a part of the Star Wars universe for about 30 years now at this point. And yeah, as I mentioned, about time to get her on a TVC card. And because of that, she's number 1 on my list. So here is my completed bracket of my top 25 action figures. As I mentioned, most of these characters are kind of a completed set or intended completed set. Malik, he needs to go alongside the updated Revan. Sararia, she needs to complete the set with Shouts for Valorum and Masamenda. You could make the case for a lot of these other characters as well. The Dark Trooper Phase 2. You could do Kasen Paratus, Anakin Solo, Jagged Fell, Clelas. You can make a case for just about all 25 of these. The Separatist Council member here. But yeah, that's usually what I look for when making top 25 or top list of Star Wars action figures I really want. At this point, we kind of have to be very selective and strategic about which action figures we request from Hasbro, since we're not going to get them all at this point. But I think the 25 I picked here, there's some deep cuts that a lot of people would really like to see from a world building aspect, and I think the tooling from all 25 of these could be reutilized for further characters down the road, minus a few like the Separatist Council member here, for example. Maybe even like the No Grey Warrior. But those kind of go hand in hand with sets that we need to complete or capitalize on success we've been getting at this time. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with my top 25 list? Are some of these characters going to be making your list? And let me know what your lists are going to be in the comments below. If you're not too sure exactly how to submit a list, I would suggest going to the Instagram page for the Star Wars TVC group, and you should be able to find the instructions in there. You could go on some of the other forums like Jedi Temple Archives, for instance, and they'll have some links in their descriptions as well. I might look into putting a link in my description as well. I'll see about if I can do that or not. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching this top 25 list for me. I haven't done it on the channel before, but I think it's about time I go ahead and talk about this. And you know, this is a great way to bring a lot of these characters into the discussion that oftentimes never get brought up ever. I mean, when's the last time we've talked about the Separatist Council member here, or Ricot Warrior, or Clelas, or Maxaron here, or Lin May? All these characters. Just a great way to bring them into the discussion. But if you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate all your support. And if you haven't already, please check out some links in the description if you haven't done so already. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.